Picture this. It's the 1940s and you are one of the many scientists working on the ENIAC. You want it to run faster, store more information, and perform more complex tasks than it already has. But for that you need memory. And if you want more memory, you need more space. Physical space. But there's one problem. The ENIAC is already in a 30-foot by 50-foot room. So for there to be a computer that has more power and more memory but takes up less space, you would have to find a way to shrink some of the components. But that'll never happen, right? You can't understand computers, let alone how to build a smaller one, until you understand their language, the binary number system. It's a 2-digit system where each digit is either a 0 or 1. A computer uses these binary representations to represent and calculate information. Why not use a normal 0 to 9 decimal system? Because a computer's components cannot differentiate between each and every number between 0 and 9. But the computer's components can determine the difference between on and off, which are 0 and 1 respectively. In the ENIAC, those components were vacuum tubes. They were used to represent the states of 1 and 0. A vacuum tube is simply a tube with a vacuum inside of it. This lets the current flow without interference of air. When there is a current, it represents the state 1. When there is no current, it represents the state 0. The ENIAC had more than 17,000 vacuum tubes in order to represent all the numbers and complicated calculations it needed to carry out. So what if we made each vacuum tube smaller? And that's basically what transistors are. The 3 scientists awarded with the invention of the first working transistors are Walter House Brattain, John Bardeen, and William Bradford Shockley. They invented their transistor in 1947, and they all got a Nobel Prize in Physics for this achievement in 1956. The trio's first working transistor was a block of germanium treated to have more electrons. There were 2 golden foils as contact points, and the entire thing worked just like a switch. When it was on, current was flowing, and when it was off, the current was blocked. Since one transistor is much smaller than a vacuum tube, they were able to successfully make computers at Bell Labs that were much smaller than the ENIAC, but still had enough processing power. But how did they keep shrinking? Our laptops and desktops are no longer as big or as heavy as they used to be. So how did they get smaller, if they're also transistors? Well, just like we shrunk the big computers, we just shrunk the transistors. Computers began using microchips. A microchip would be able to contain the transistors required for the computer to function. Over time, the transistors themselves got smaller and smaller, and engineers were able to fit more of them in a single chip. For this to work, they used something called EUV lithography. EUV stands for Extreme Ultraviolet Lithography. Lithography is a method of printing that involves drawing an image onto a flat surface, then transferring that image onto paper with ink and water. EUV lithography is a similar process, but it uses UV light to precisely print out a microchip. The transistors and all the components needed on the chip are drawn by this light onto a thin wafer of silicon. This thin and precise laser beam is what allows these incredibly small microchips to be produced. And that's the story of how we managed to shrink computers over the course of almost a century. If you're curious about the physical components of the computer, I'll leave the links of some of my sources in the description. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave some feedback in the comments. Goodbye, everyone.